My name is Ed Friedman. I know a lot of you, some of you I don't know, some crew here from Georgetown. We have one woman here from Kingfield, which is great. Thank you for coming. And for those of you that don't know, this is a Friends of Merrymeeting Bay presentation. We're a group based around the bay, which is kind of behind that black trifold over there. You can kind of see where the Kennebec and the Androscoggin come in. And we do a lot. We do an active education program with school kids around the bay. We reach probably 1,500, 2,000 kids a year in school and out of school in the field. A lot of research stuff, a lot of advocacy stuff, and for the land trust as well. So we've protected a lot of valuable wetland around the bay. And you can look at some of our posters up there afterwards. Some of you may not have gotten this. There's some on the table over there. It's the calendar for the season. And the next event is focused on a property we've been about 5 years in protecting up in Dresden now, that's been described as the most significant prehistoric archaeological site in the state of Maine for the period of about 4,000 to 9,000 years ago. And it's also got some great rare plants on it. And a few weeks ago, Andy Cutco here, ecologist, and Art Spies, who's going to be the speaker, then gave a great walk and talk on the property. So this costs us a lot of money to put on. Patagonia helps us out. Here's a donated item tonight for a door prize. If you'd like to write your name on a piece of paper here, drop it in the box, put some money in the basket, you'll be eligible to win the door prize. Odds are pretty good tonight. Right, so smart meters. Some of you have heard about them a lot, some of you have heard about them a little bit, some of you may have them on your homes or not. The women who are speaking tonight, who can all tell you a little bit about themselves, I hope they'll do that. I've been working on this issue for over a year, I'd say. They have all been complainants before the Public Utilities Commission. The main issues around meters are typically radiation and privacy issues, but there's a host of other related ones as well. Elisa Cook here to my right has put up a great website, smartmetersafety.com, right? And really done a lot of work. And really, thanks to the work of all these women, Maine has an opt-out, but it's a cost opt-out, which is horrible for me. It's it's sort of, a lot of us think that's an extortion, but for people that are electrically hypersensitive, it's at least an option. And whether or not it makes things worse now or not, it's another thing, but people can get out of it that way. And so all of us are continuing to work on the issue. I've not been working on it very long. I also filed a complaint with a number of complainants, co-complainants before the PUC. They all keep getting rejected, which is no surprise. So some of us are probably on our way to the Supreme Court. The PUC is a quasi-judicial body, so you don't appeal from them to Superior Court like you would with, say, the Board of Environmental Protection or any other agency. You go right to the Maine Supreme Court or law court. So the women here have been going around the state doing a lot of information presentations about this, letting people know what their options are, and really trying to educate folks about the issue. There's really no publicity about this. A lot of money behind it from the Department of Energy. And the PUC was quick to take that money, as Maine is quick to do on many issues. Take the money regardless of what the consequences may be. So with that, I'll let you introduce yourselves and tell folks a little bit about you. And it's our first night, it's our 15th year of a speaker series. So this is pretty cool. Sorry there's not a better turnout here, but it was sort of short notice.
15th year.
Yeah, so, and we typically have 30-something people, and we used to do it more at Bowdoinham, and we'll do a bunch of the programs in Brunswick. But we try and spread it around because we do have members in all the communities around the bay, and there are 9 of them. Okay.
Thank you so much. And Ed does not give himself nearly enough credit, because even though he hasn't been working on this very long, he's been working very hard. So thank you for your role. It's been amazing, and will continue to be, because we are going to be working to get the opt-out cost down this year. That's going to be one of our goals.
We're going to get it to go away, some of us.
Down, yes, down to the point of non-existent, hopefully. I am Elisa Cook, and I started the Smart Meter Safety Coalition a little more than a year ago, because
You're good. If that's your good side.
Because I really did not want a smart meter on my house, and that's how I got involved, because I do feel the effects of wireless. And I had gone to CMP and asked for a medical exemption, and not only did they say no, but they hired the same firm that had represented the tobacco industry and the asbestos industry to prove how safe smart meters were. So I thought, there's probably something more to this, and thus began the fight. So, yeah, and also the Exxon, found out from the Down East Magazine article, they also represented Exxon. So, when a firm that's been hired to represent industry in cancer cases tells you how safe a product is, then you have to wonder. And these are the same people telling us how safe smart meters are. So thus began the fight, and here we are. Smart Meter Safety Coalition, you can find us at smartmetersafety.com. As Ed mentioned, right now there is a document on there that really we want people to have as much information as they can in order to make an informed decision. So even though we might believe that smart meters are not a good idea, we respect people's right to have them if they have weighed the pros and the cons and made a really informed decision for their family. So that's really what we want you to do, is to go to the website, get as much information as you can to make an informed decision, now that we do have the right to opt out. So the PUC thankfully did give people back in May the right to keep their existing meter, which is what we wanted all along. We're the only state so far, we're working to get other states opt-outs, but we're the only state so far, the only place in the world so far actually, that has the option to retain our existing analog meter. So California right now is about to get an opt-out where they can have a smart meter with the power turned off. We don't believe that is a good idea because it's still emitting something called dirty electricity. So if you have the option right now to have a smart meter with the transmitter turned off, it's still emitting very high radio frequency spikes throughout your whole home wiring. We can talk a little bit about that more later on. But so we are the lead complainants. After our cases were consolidated, the PUC did rule that people had the right to opt out. CMP fought very, very hard against people's right to opt out. They wanted to force every single person to have a smart meter. Thankfully, that did not happen. The PUC ruled that it's in the public's best interest to be able to opt out. The two options, as I mentioned, one is a smart meter with the communications turned off. We don't believe that it's a great option, but certainly it's better than having the traditional smart meter. Our feeling is that the best opt-out option is the electromechanical meter, which is the meter that you already have or you had before the smart meter was installed. Okay, it's not just smart meters, it's the whole system, which is called a mesh network, which means, CMP likes to compare smart meters to personal wireless devices like a Wi-Fi router or a cell phone. The reason why that's not accurate is because your cell phone is not engineered to transmit back and forth to everyone else's cell phone in the neighborhood, bouncing signals, boosting signals, piggybacking signals, which is what smart meters do. So the smart meters collect data, they transmit data, they're constantly going, they're chatting back and forth to establish this network. So your smart meter is not operating in a vacuum. In fact, it is working to create this web of signals throughout the neighborhood, throughout the city, throughout the state. There is no pocket, unfortunately, that escapes this radiation. So this is what, and this is an industry illustration. It's not, I wish it were neat little hops from house to house into the collectors. It's not. These signals are omnidirectional. I mean, to say it's a blanket of radiation is really not an exaggeration.
Actually, that one chart that has the peaks from Utah would have been great. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Okay.
Just go.
But but you're right. I mean, so this is what industry would like you to believe is going on. It's more, if we just put all those dots all over everything. And I mean, by CMP's own admission, there is a lot of built-in redundancy, there is overlap. So it's really, when they call it a mesh network, that's what it is. It's a blanket.
Yeah,
Just a question,
Sure.
if you don't have it on your house, are you still affected by it on every other house?
That's a great question. The answer is yes, absolutely. You know, it's better to not have one on your house. It's better. It's not ideal, and certainly opt-outs are woefully inadequate, as we've been saying, but it's still better. I mean, I personally don't have one on my house. I'm surrounded by them, I'm sensitive, and I'm okay. But it depends how close you are to collectors, to repeaters, so there are other factors, but to answer your question, yes, it's much better if you don't have one, but you still are affected, and that's what's sad about this. You know, I mean, you really can't get away from it. You can mitigate a little bit. There's no shielding that will work for this since the signals are coming from everywhere. But it's better to opt out than to have one on your home, certainly. And that is, you know, I mean, since we have the time, I will answer that the reason why it's better is because if you have a smart meter, the way it works is it's converting the high voltage to low voltage and sending our radio frequency spikes throughout your whole home. So every piece of wiring in your home acts as an antenna for these transmissions. So it's not just being near the smart meter. You know, people say that, oh, I'm concerned my child is sleeping on the wall where this, you know, that's bad, but it's just as bad to be across the house, I mean, in another room, because if you have wiring in that room, your wiring is picking up the transmissions from that smart meter, so that's why it's just better not to have one. In order to fully utilize the smart meter and determine which appliance is using how much energy when, every single appliance you have, from your hairdryer to your washer dryer to your dishwasher to your refrigerator, is going to come equipped, if it isn't already, with its own wireless chip. So that wireless transmitter, and it's a transmitter, communicates with the smart meter on the outside of your house. So this is a home area network. And this is what CMP doesn't tell you, but Consumers Digest did a whole investigative report on this back in February, that this is what a smart meter really is. It's picking up transmissions from every single appliance, so your whole home is filled with layers and layers of this radiation in order for the smart meter to tell you which appliance is using how much energy when. Yes.
So that means if you have old stuff that you've gotten for free from, it's not even, the smart meter's not even gonna do its job.
Not in that way, right. Not in the home area network. Exactly.
yeah, we'll talk about a little bit later, I think, is it during my piece, when we talk about the fact that in order for this to work, it's really us that has to be smart.
Yeah.
And you know, they talk about the meters being all smart and everything, but you know, the fact is that without purchasing all of those
Yeah, so
things, you're not gonna be able to use it.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
you're not, it's not gonna help at all. And most of the studies to date, most of the pilot studies that have looked at whether consumers actually change their
Mhm.
behavior as a result of this, which this is why the conservation
Yeah.
community wants it. This is why I'm so distressed, because the conservation community has supported it. But what they're not seeing is that, you know, nobody's saying, well, where are all those old appliances going to be going with all their chips? Where's all the wire? You know, there are other environmental consequences as a result of this, and they're only looking at the energy savings, and the energy savings is only if we're gonna get rid of all our other appliances.
Yeah.
So it's like, you know, this big.
And the wireless industry is very much behind this. In fact, just today, something came out, the CTIA, which is the lobbying arm of the telecom industry, they commissioned this new study that said how great wireless is for the environment. Things like farmers will now be able to tell how much fertilizer they're using, how many pesticides they're using, so they're be able to save in fuel costs. And you know, that's the big push from the wireless industry. Well, smart grid, you know, they can lay off all the meter readers, will reduce our carbon footprint, and you know, all of us. I mean, we're conservationists, we're environmentalists. I mean, I'm on the board of the Natural Resources Council. I've been doing safer chemical policy work for years. This is a bunch of baloney. I mean, this is the biggest toxics issue I've personally seen, and we're all for saving energy, just not at the expense of human health. I mean, this is a horrendous way to do it. It carries so much risk. There is nothing green about this, but the wireless industry is really preying on the environmental community and saying, hey, look, this whole thing has really, really been greenwashed. And the wireless industry, I mean, this report out today shows that, I mean, the wireless lobby is actively, they commissioned a report to say how great wireless is for the environment. I mean, there you go. So that helps us. You know, that's what we've been saying all along, that look, this is only going to benefit the utilities, the software makers, the wireless industry. It has nothing to do. There's really nothing green about it, especially because this can all be done hardwired with none of the risks of wireless radiation. Okay, I think we've covered all of this. This 15,000 transmissions a day, you may have heard or read where CMP says, oh, but they're only on for 45 seconds a day. So most people would think, oh, they're on for 45 seconds and then they're off for the rest of the day. But that 45 seconds is actually a hypothetical made up of 15,400 transmissions a day. So they're in microsecond bursts, and now we know that each burst is at least 100 times more powerful than a cell phone. So on, off, 15,400 times every day, double that possibly when you consider that it's actually receiving and then transmitting. So that's very different than on for 45 seconds and off for the rest of the day. A very, very misleading piece of information that CMP is putting out there, we think.
And just another thing regarding the cell phones, you'll hear them, they were comparing them to cell phones until the World Health Organization came out and said that it's a possible carcinogen, RF radiation. But they were comparing it for the whole year we've been involved in this to cell phones. So I'll say this, the problem is the FCC standards, they do not regulate, well, they do time averaging. So they're not looking at the peak pulse, and they're looking at over 24 hours or over 6 hours, whatever, depending on what the standard is. And they're also not looking at cumulative effects. So they're not looking at the whole network and all the radiation coming in. They're looking at 1 meter, and they're saying this 1 meter is allowed to have this amount of radiation. They're not saying, you know, plus your refrigerator, plus this, and then also, you know, all your neighbors, and that's not a part of the FCC regulations. And that's, so yes, are some of these things following FCC regulation? Yes, but the regulations are way outdated. And there's no one that will argue that.
Yeah,
I don't think, even CMP, I don't think argued that.
No, because CMP
Because I can't.
even says that, I mean, FCC regulations protect us from getting burned. That's it. So no one's going to get burned from a smart meter, but that's of course not what we're worried about. And now that the World Health Organization has classified this specific type of radiation as a possible carcinogen, we think it's really wrong to have to pay to opt out of a possible carcinogen, so we're working on that. But I mean, this is a really big deal, and Sue's absolutely right. CMP is no longer comparing smart meters to cell phones. I mean, we know that they're 100 times more powerful now, but also that the World Health Organization has classified this type of radiation as a possible carcinogen. CMP is now, interestingly, backing away from the cell phone comparison. Okay, moving on. We explained all this. Okay. We are here, like I said, to give you the information you need in order to make an informed decision. We may believe that smart meters are unsafe. You can do your homework and find out for yourself. In fact, but the safety issue, you know, the PUC is directed by law to provide safe equipment, safe facilities and equipment. But they've also said that they can't determine whether smart meters are safe. And even the Maine Centers for Disease Control has said they don't know that smart meters are safe. No one really knows. I mean, there's not been one study done on smart meters to determine whether they're safe or not. So really, no one, I mean, we can say they're not safe, CMP can say they're safe, but no one knows. So it's really up to each person to decide. We'll talk about the short and long-term health effects, radio frequency interference. One of the major complaints we're getting nowadays is people's Netflix is no longer working, their Wi-Fi router is no longer functioning because of all the interference. Major data protection and privacy issues. The first smart meter piece of legislation ever in the world was just signed last year having to do with cybersecurity. The PUC is now being directed to look into issues of cybersecurity because these things are so hackable. And really, everyone's personal information is very, very vulnerable to theft. Fire safety. Smart meters have been implicated in many fires across the world. There have been instances of overbilling. People are seeing their bills doubling and tripling. A lot of people believe, and actually some studies have shown that that's because of the electronic interference. People's accounts are getting crossed, but also they're just faulty. I mean, many of them are just, they don't work. And we've been hearing that mostly off the record from installers. The more smart meters that get installed, the more people are saying they're not accurate. Okay. That is all for me. Julie? Okay. Julie Tupper will talk about the adverse health effects. Sure. Do you want me to come up here, I guess? Either way, I'll take this.
That'd be great.
If you want
And
to,
so-
I'm gonna say it.
I mean, we definitely want questions, so I'm fine with people jumping in, but do you want to save them till the end, or does it matter?
Doesn't matter to me.
Just please keep your questions coming. Yeah.
Better to save them to the
Save them
end.
till the end.
Yeah.
If you do not get a smart meter, if you opt out, but you have a new appliance that has one of those chips, is that chip frustrated?
Yeah, oh, that's a good question. It's still transmitting regardless. I mean, ideally you wouldn't, because you can't turn them off, so ideally you wouldn't have a new appliance with a transmitter. I mean, you can, there are certain companies that are making them, there are certain companies that aren't. GE got a federal subsidy, so a lot of GE appliances, yeah, right. A lot of GE appliances have them, but if you're concerned about the level of radiation coming from them, you can always ask and make sure you don't have one.
But we were also told that you can't remove it yourself
That's what I.
because it voids your warranty. So just, yeah, there was somebody in California that bought a Bosch,
Right.
all appliances, and all of them have wireless transmitters. And she wanted to remove them, and they said no, so she sent them back.
Julie.
Okay.
Julie, who are you?
Yes, I'm Julie Tupper. I filed the 10-person complaint with the PUC as it pertains to health. Why? Because unfortunately, I am one of many who feel the physical effects of wireless technology. Like so many small-framed people, and I've noticed a lot of women fit into that category. Based on people coming up before the Scarborough Committee, there were probably 30 or 40 people came up, most of them women, and they all complained about the effects. So when I took a look at that, I stepped back from that and said, you know, when you look at this, they're mostly women, and they seem to all be small-framed. So what's it doing to children? So we're kind of the canaries in the coal mine. We can feel the effects. Everybody's different. Every person in here has likes, dislikes, sensitivities, intolerances. How many of us are lactose or gluten intolerant, penicillin adverse, or have allergies to dust, mold, dander? Folks who don't have these sensitivities can't know what it feels like, and thus it's easy to dismiss or just be less sympathetic. Sensitivity to EMF and radiation is no different, except for the undisputed fact that it has been linked to cancer. If large doses can burn or kill you, what are the effects of long-term exposure in smaller doses? Nobody has that answer. That includes the PUC, the CDC, and CMP, who, by the way, said during the initial meetings in Scarborough that this whole installation is unfamiliar territory. That's right. The design of the grid, the installation, and the impacts are all new to CMP as well. CMP's hired scientists can spend all the time they want in labs trying to come to a conclusion. But let me tell you, the experiment is going on now. We the people are having effects. We are the lab mice. Are folks who don't experience the symptoms willing to ignore those who are sensitive to EMF and radiation? Perhaps initially, but what about when a loved one is negatively affected? Why would anyone hearing about the symptoms firsthand take a calculated risk that no one they know will be hurt by this mesh? Don't ignore symptoms, things you hear from people that you may be experiencing from the smart meters once they're installed or in a community. Sleep disturbances, irritability, fatigue, headache, difficulty concentrating, memory loss, muscle joint pain, dizziness, chest pain, heart palpitations, changes in eyesight, nausea, throbbing in lymph nodes. Unfortunately, I've experienced most of these on the list. Over 10 years ago, I became very aware of my sensitivity to EMF and radiation. It became evident due to the cumulative effects of various technologies in one place. So I did something about it in order to make my home safe. As I became aware of CMP's initiative to blanket Maine with the wireless smart meters, I wondered, where was the consideration for us who have greater sensitivity to the effects of EMF and radiation? Where was the discussion with the citizens about going the wireless route instead of hardwired? What about the developing bodies of children? I have never been so passionate about something like this to willingly be an advocate in a public forum. I attended the town meetings in South Portland and Scarborough. As stories were printed in local papers, people started to call me from various towns throughout Maine. Hearing the cries for help, I decided to file a 10-person complaint. Since then, I have received more and more calls from CMP ratepayers. The cries continue. The anger at those who are supposed to protect us grows because our voices are not heard, because our rights are violated. People are becoming very sick since they received their meters. They want answers. They want the whole truth. They just want a peaceful life. They don't care about going online and reading about the usage. There are thousands of ratepayers not wanting the wireless mesh due to the number of concerns. Evidently, that number hasn't reached CMP's threshold to be concerned. What number will cause a shock? This is all about money, money versus morals. They are not being good stewards to Maine people. The rest of the country is watching and taking heed. This is a global matter. Unfortunately, the PUC refused to review the health issue. Why? Because nobody has answers. Because nobody wants to take on the huge industry. Because it's too controversial. My sensitivity is real. The pain varies, my bones, palpitations, headaches, and even in my throat. I did not have a wireless smart meter installed on my home in South Portland, but because the houses around me being relatively close, I still had major symptoms. I have since moved to a home where the neighbors are not close to each other. That's the distance I will go to be safe. How much more myself do I have to pay? My sensitivity is both a blessing and a curse. If I didn't experience this so strongly, I most likely wouldn't take any action and just live with the bombardment that we are exposed to every day and think all this technology is so very cool. I know that EMF and radiation weakens my immune system. When the immune system is compromised, that's when disease takes over. Cancer is now a household word. There are things happening out there causing all this sickness. We need to be focused on prevention. We are all living downstream with this technology, this effluent washing over us every day. Which of us will be the ones unable to tolerate the effects? We have up to this point been able to make personal choices without penalty. That is no longer the case within the boundaries of CMP. But the cries are getting louder and the truth about the health concerns is rising. I share my story in hopes that people feeling alone or unaware of what to do will step forward and share their experiences and be a voice. We need to rally. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. Julie talked about the short-term effects and effects for, I'm just going to give you this. This is copies of all of the references in my presentation, copies of the documents. So if you want to look at that. But Julie talked about the short-term effects and how she feels it. Well, even though you don't feel it, it's still affecting you, and that's that. Everyone is being affected. Some people are more sensitive than others. I in particular am not sensitive.
Who are you anyway?
Oh, I'm sorry, Dianne Wilkins. And I also filed a 10-person complaint. Mine was more on the lines for violations of constitutional issues, but that's not what I'm here to talk about tonight. Tonight I'm just going to talk about the long-term effects. I just wanted to start out by saying that the Maine CDC came out and said that they didn't think there was overwhelming evidence that the emissions from smart meters caused adverse health effects. But in reality, the Maine CDC completed only a very limited review of just a few of the available studies about the type of radiation exposures from smart meters, of which they later declared did not prove the meters were safe. Subsequently, the Maine Public Utilities Commission also stated the CDC's results were not authoritative because their review was limited, and also given that the CDC is not the federally designated agency appointed to determine the health effects of radio frequency radiation. Since the Commission said in its notice to investigate smart meters that their investigation would not make any determination on whether there are any adverse health effects from smart meters, and also that they cannot and will not decide that smart meters are safe or unsafe, it leaves customers are left with answering the question, are there health risks involved in having a wireless smart meter that emits radio frequency radiation? It is undisputed that our federal authorities, the FDA, the EPA, the FCC, and the U.S. Center for Device and Radiological Health, and many world-renowned scientists all agree that the current FCC guidelines for the type of radiation from smart meters only protects people from the radiation levels that causes burns or heating of body tissues, and does not protect us from any other forms of injury, such as cancer, degenerative diseases, heart irregularities, hormonal disruptions, or any other forms of injury. When you hear that so-and-so's health study or review has concluded that radiation from wireless devices meets FCC safety guidelines, all that they're really saying is that we're protected from getting burned from the RF radiation from these devices, but not protected from any other forms of injury. In fact, the FDA, which is the federal authority designated by Congress to determine the health effects of RF radiation, was so concerned with the lack of adequate FCC safety guidelines and the risk of harm from the smart meter type radiation that in 2003 it nominated the U.S. National Toxicology Program to study and make a determination of the health effects. As of today, this study is still underway and not due for completion until 2014. So at this point in time, our governing U.S. authority on this issue has not yet determined the health effects from the type of radiation from smart meters. What convinced our FDA that there may be risk of adverse health effects and to embark on this long-term study of this type of RF radiation done by a federal agency in the US of A? In essence, while the industry-funded studies claim they could not duplicate the results of non-industry funded studies, most non-industry funded studies have found serious adverse health effects. In 2010, in a recent comprehensive review of all the published studies to date, Blake Levitt and Professor Lay concluded that there are enough studies showing serious adverse health effects to conclude that new FCC safety guidelines are needed now, that children are especially vulnerable to radio frequency effects, and that everyone should limit their exposures to the type of radiation from smart meters. In 2009, another recent peer-reviewed study published in Pathophysiology by Dr. Blank and Dr. Goodman from Columbia University, New York, reviewed over 1,500 health studies and found serious risk to human health from radio frequency exposures at levels far below the current FCC safety guidelines. In 2008, the Environmental Working Group reviewed all the studies available at that time and also concluded that our children are more vulnerable and at risk of adverse health effects from the type of radiation from smart meters due to their immature bodies. In 2000, Mobile Telecommunications and Health was commissioned by T-Mobile Telecom to review all the current scientific research to date up to 2000 and concluded there were serious adverse health effects that warranted precautionary health protection for everyone. Some of the adverse health effects from these publications and many other recent reviews are really, really very scary. Increases in incidence of childhood leukemia, Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis, Alzheimer's, diabetes, 30% decrease in sperm count and sperm cell damage, accumulating damage to the eyes, increases in toxins crossing the blood-brain barrier, cell DNA damage that can be passed down to the next generation, drops in melatonin levels causing sleeplessness, depression, and rapid aging, findings that children and pregnant women are more susceptible to the health effects of radiofrequency radiation, decreased attention, memory, and motor skills in children, decreases in calcium ion that leads to reduced immunity to all disease, and finally, increases in brain, skin, breast, testicular, and testicular cancer. So you can see from this list that the risk exists, just from the fact that these adverse findings exist. Do we really want to take this kind of risk with our children's health? As you can see, also see from the list, the FDA had good reasons to be concerned and to begin their long-term study. Recently, there was another very important warning that you may want to take note of about the risk of adverse health effects. This past May 2011, the World Health Organization classified the type of radiation from smart meters as a possible carcinogen in the same category as DDT, dioxin, and lead. The WHO used the radio frequency from cell phones in their study to make this determination, but the determination also applies to any wireless device that uses radio frequency waves in the microwave frequency range, like cell phones and smart meters. In fact, in correspondence between the Maine CDC's state toxicologist, the state health officer, and the Maine Radiation Control Program, the CDC asked if the smart meters were similar to cell phones, and the Maine State Radiation Control Division answered yes, since the smart meters use the 2.4 gigahertz and the 5.8 gigahertz frequencies, similar and also at higher frequencies than cell phones. As recently confirmed with WHO by the Maine Smart Meter Safety Coalition, the WHO's classification of radio frequency does indeed apply to the wireless smart meters emissions due to their radio frequency range, and since they are also being installed in close proximity to people, near kids' beds, kitchen walls, exterior doors, and many other close situations. It's perfectly reasonable and justified for people to conclude that there is a risk of harm to their health from the type of radiation emitted from smart meters, and many very good reasons to consider an opt-out option. So, thank you. And I'd like to introduce Sue for Foley-Ferguson, and she's going to talk about a bunch of stuff.
Yeah, I just, I'll tell you how I got into it. I studied biology at the University of Michigan, and having studied biology, I'd always been concerned about wireless from the time I graduated from college. My roommate from college went to work directly after her MBA to work for Motorola, and had this huge cell phone like this big in the early 80s. It was one of the first big ones, you know. And I was like, something just can't be right. That's, you know, if something works like that, it's got to be doing something inside your body. It's got to affect you somehow, or it's got to affect the air. It's going to affect the air. So I fought real hard with my husband to not have wireless at all in my house for many, many years. And anyway, he finally won because my father-in-law came with a free package of his Wi-Fi, and he said, "Look what I got you guys." And, you know, it was 2 against 1, and there we go. And I said, fine, far corner of the house, basement, by the cement, you know, blocked me out. I don't use it, well, now I do a little bit, but it's always been a concern of mine. And I continued with my involvement in the environment. I worked for an environmental education organization for about 6 to 7 years, and I founded the Friends Rachel Carson National Wildlife Refuge. I worked for the Cape Elizabeth Land Trust for 3 years, and I was a town councilor in Scarborough for 6 years, and at that time I pushed a heavy environmental agenda down there with a land acquisition bond, one of the first in the state, that coincided with the Land for Maine's Future Fund, and I'm still the chair of the Parks and Conservation Land Board down there. So as a conservationist, who had this sort of inkling that, wireless was a problem, when I heard about smart meters, I thought they were gonna wire them. I didn't even think that they were gonna be wireless. I had no clue at all that they were gonna be wireless. And I have been involved in the political process, so I know a little bit how it works. And so when I went up to town hall for, I don't know, land acquisition meeting, I think, or something, I ran into Elisa, who I did not know, and I'm looking over her shoulder and I see smart meter. I'm like, oh yeah, smart. What's the problem with them? And she said they were wireless. I'm like, what? I never heard they were wireless. The media has been covering this for how long? And the Public Utilities Commission has taken this up for how long? And they leave that little wireless word way over to the side, and then, smart meters are gonna do this for us, they're gonna conserve energy, we're gonna say this, it's everything good. And they leave the fact out that it's wireless now, or they might say it, one time in an article that's huge. When I found that out, I was like, wait a minute, they're gonna basically put cell towers all over the place, because it's not just the meters on your house that are doing the 2.4 gigahertz like your cell phones, but they've got the collectors and stuff at 5.2 gigahertz, which is more powerful, and those are collecting all of this information. So CMP is going to be using your house to collect people's data and send it, and that's a new thing. CMP has an easement to your house to provide power to your house, but they don't have a right to use your house for business purposes, in my opinion. That's one of the rights, constitutional rights, we'll talk about in a second. But anyway, I became concerned and I hooked up with Elisa, and then we did not know each other ahead of time. We're all from separate sort of areas. Elisa's a journalist, Dianne is a paralegal, Julie works in marketing, right? Designer, she's a designer and biology rated, and we're all parents. And I really believe, I'm convinced that this type of radiation is going to be the next tobacco. I think we are at the cusp of another bad situation. And all over the world, there's different regulations, just so you know, around the world. I can't go around quoting them all, but I know France, I think, has taken Wi-Fi out of schools. Israel has taken it out of schools. So there is a movement afoot, because they do, and with tobacco, you should know that it was 50 years before, the first study that said tobacco causes cancer, there were all these naysayers. It took 50 years to get tobacco companies to admit it. So the fact that this is happening this quickly should be disconcerting to you as well, that we are finding that the evidence is there, but they're having a hard time listening. We don't want to listen. I have a smartphone, and I love the iPads. I love, these technology, it's fun, it's new, it's innovative, there's a lot of promise for it. We don't want to know the truth, really, when it comes down to it. But we should, and we need to know, because we need to protect ourselves and our children. And we also, my philosophy has always been everything in moderation. This is not moderation. Using my cell phone when I decide to use it, for me, is moderation. But to have every appliance in your house have a wireless meter, to have what Julie says all the cars now have, they're communicating about your gas level and things via wireless. And what's happening is more and more people are becoming sensitive, just like with allergies. As you get older, you can develop sensitivities, but as you're exposed to things sometimes, like for instance, poison ivy, the first time I got it, I didn't have it very much. Second time I got it even worse. The third time, it was full blown out. Your body sometimes doesn't protect you. It sometimes creates a worse reaction. And the same thing's happening with, okay, so this isn't even my topic. Sorry, I'm going, that wasn't even supposed to be my topic. My topic is why I chose to opt out. Here's some other reasons besides the health. Radio frequency interference. Elisa mentioned a little bit that Wi-Fi routers and Netflix security systems, computers, garage door openers, those kinds of things. Some of because some of them already are wireless, the smart meters are interfering with them, and they are, with medical devices, the medical community is supposed to prevent, they're required to prevent interference, to work towards, the manufacturers have to. But the manufacturer's smart meters don't have any requirements on them. They aren't required to be UL tested. They don't have to conform to any code at state, local, or federal, or national, any code. Now, are they being tested? Yes, because they have stockholders that want to make sure their products work. But are they being tested by third-party, impartial people? No, they're not, because they're not required to be tested. And I found this out through my code officer, through the state, when we went and really dig for this information. There's one guy who wrote a complaint in about interference, and as a result of that complaint, they had to hire, CMP hired a specialist, which I'm sure all ratepayers are paying for, to deal with interference issues. And if you have an interference issue, you can call CMP now and get them. But again, without that complaint in front of the PUC, that wouldn't have happened, because they said there wasn't any problem with it. But the guy in Cape Elizabeth is a software designer. He worked at home. He opted out, does not have a meter on his house, and he gets disconnected off of his internet 6 times a day now if he's in his office on the right side of the house, because his neighbor's meter, he is right next, they have a very close neighborhood, real tight-knit neighborhood. He can use it over in the living room, but not in his office. So, and it frustrates his wife because she wants to stream Netflix, is what, he doesn't use the Netflix, but she streams Netflix while she does the laundry, and she can't do that anymore, so she's very upset about that. Over 100 complaints have been recorded, but there's no place that they're really putting them down. The complaints and letters are in the PUC dockets, you can go find them, but no one's keeping track of them and saying, how many. CMP is supposed to be keeping track of them now as a result of that complaint.
That's 100 complaints in Maine.
Well, that was before, this was before that complaint.
There's
probably
so
way
many
more. There's way more
So
than
many
100.
more.
Actually, this number 100
Because they're still saying they're not getting any.
Right, that number came from CMP, and that was even before they hired the subcontractor.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I've gotten 100 complaints, so I'm sure.
It's
there are
probably
many
thousands.
more.
And I have to say, a woman in South Portland who signed one of the interference complaint, her washing machine blew, and they did attribute it to the smart meter. And CMP came over, her own electrician came over, CMP brought an electrician, and they attributed it to the smart meter, but they couldn't figure out, they were trying to blame it on the wiring, because sometimes old wiring cannot handle these new types of things. They couldn't figure that, her wiring wasn't that old. They couldn't figure it out. The fact is, they paid her $400 for a new washer dryer. Again, you don't hear about this stuff in the media, but that CMP did that. So now how many other people are those kinds of things happening? I don't know.
Excuse me, I was yesterday going over an old docket, the Cephras complaint, I don't know how you...
Cypress, that's the one.
Cypress, yeah, and there's a
Yeah.
mention in there that that was May of this year, there were over 3,000 incidents that had come into CMP. Now, all of those are confidential right now. Now, you should be able to get them without the names on them, but right now they're not letting you know or letting anyone know what those are about.
Did it say 3,000?
Over 3,000.
That's something new filed with the docket?
Say again?
Is a new document filed?
No,
with the
there's a ton of documents in that docket, and I was just in one of those.
Interesting. Another example, I hate to jump in here, but another example of how CMP is trying to keep that number low, or at least cover it up, is they were ordered, CMP was ordered as part of that complaint to put in its opt-out notification information about radio frequency interference. That is, when CMP is supposed to let you know that you can opt out, they were also supposed to let you know that there is a number you can call if you have radio frequency interference issues. They didn't do that, so they ignored that part of the order. We believe they violated intentionally that part of the order because they didn't want people to know. So finally, the PUC forced them to put that information in the opt-out notification from a certain point on, so now it's in there. But what it says is, it's very unlikely that you will have interference with a smart meter, but if you do, you can call this number. So, I mean, all along, there's been a really concerted effort to downplay this, and we have to wonder why.
The issues with medical devices, such as pacemakers, you know, when we talk about the cost being an extortion, I would have to say that for those individuals who have older pacemakers, the newer pacemakers can kind of handle some interference, but the older ones, they can't. And one gentleman in Scarborough, his wife walked into the Scarborough Library after they put in a wireless system, security system, and she went to the ground and almost died. And hers was a deep brain stimulator, not a pacemaker actually, deep brain. And so she ended up in Boston, she was fine, but he said, you know, she's supposed to stay away from all wireless. Now how is somebody gonna stay away from all wireless if every meter in the whole neighborhood is gonna be wireless? So we tried to convince the PUC, look, these people at least should have a no-cost opt-out. Their doctors are telling them not to. So you can go into the dockets and read about the people that have pacemakers that are very upset about this. Now, like I said, the new pacemakers are supposed to be better. But, let's see, question?
Yeah, I had a question. Can you, if they're not letting you see information, can you file a Freedom of Information request?
Not with CMP because it's a private company. So it's only,
How about with the PUC though?
yes, but the PUC is allowing you to see everything, well, not everything that CMP provides to them. We've been privy to settlement discussions prior to this whole opt-out, and some of the information that we have in our heads and in our paperwork is supposed to be confidential, and we're not even supposed to share it with anyone anymore. We need an attorney. We're trying to get the information. We'd like to get the information out if you know anybody that can help us. They do ask the PUC, you know, to hold certain things proprietary, what they call proprietary information as confidential, because their vendors are giving them discounts for this, and they, you know, competition market, you know, I don't know.
But what type of information are you?
Yeah, what are you looking for?
Just information about complaints that maybe they want to keep quiet. And then, of course, if you're being told that stuff is confidential, why don't you, can you sue them for that shouldn't be confidential?
We can request that it not be confidential, and they can deny it, like they always have, and yeah, we can sue, but it costs money.
Or you can get 10 people together and file a new 10-person complaint to access that information, which would be another way to go. I mean, we believe that the more 10-person complaints that come to the PUC, the more likely they may be to move this thing.
Some of the information that's confidential that I'd like to see pulled out has to do with the structure of the mesh and the area networks and what they call repeaters. Repeaters are the big poles that are collecting your neighborhood information, and they, in our conferences, they told us that 30% of the build out of this entire project was unknown. In other words, we asked, where geographically are these big towers going to be put? They said they did not know. Why did they not know? Because it's a mesh system, because the hill or that building may interfere with the wireless connections, which makes sense, right? There's a big, huge mountain, and instead of putting the pole here to transfer a wireless message, we might have to put one over here. But we won't know until we get all the signals going at one time. But 30% of an entire build-out is a huge, huge percentage. It's like, you know, when you talk about contingency for anything, you're talking about 10%. 30% is huge. The estimates for the number of repeaters, which is a very expensive part of this system, is part of what the no-cost opt-outs are, or the cost of opt-outs are the repeaters that we're paying for. It's not just the meter readers that have to come and read our meters. It's these repeaters that they're assuming they're going to need because we opt out. So because my house because my house isn't missing a, so where's that big one? So I opt out right here, they're saying they might need a repeater over here that might cost $150,000 or $200,000 or whatever. The confidential information that I can't share with you is how many meters that they said that they needed, how that all developed, how that was all worked out, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Believe me, we fought, and I continued during my complaint for reconsideration, because I had fought from the get-go prior to any confidential discussions that they are way overestimating it, and they have no clue, and we should not have to pay for them at all. And believe me, if that information were out, the cost of opt-outs for the meter readers would be quite small, like as in $5 a month or $2 a month. So in other words, this cost for the repeaters that nobody knows about that is confidential, it is what the opt-out people are
So they're
paying.
gonna adjust that after they figure it out?
Well, we have to get the confidential information out first.
I will
That's
say,
the problem.
I will say in our complaint, we did ask, because the last thing we asked for was that the PUC establish a toll-free number with the Public Advocate's Office, which is part of the PUC, that people could call in any issue with meters, and the response from the commissioners was that people can call into CMP and report their issues now. So it was good enough to call into the private company, but you didn't need to call into the governmental agency where you could FOIA it or it will be published or whatever. So, Lloyd, you had a question?
Just